Hey folks, and welcome back to the channel, and in this video I wanted to discuss the new Eternal Fire as they took second place at the Blast Spring Bounty, which was a really solid run for this team with all things considered, as of course they did make the roster move, bringing Jota onto the team in place of Calyx. And I actually did a whole video breaking down this roster move, and it wasn't really one of the more viewed videos, but if you want to go take a look at kind of what I thought about the move and kind of my predictions for the team going forward and things of that nature, I was actually pretty high on this move. Yes, it wasn't the same type of blockbuster move as Vitality picking up Rops or FaZe picking up Elige, or the whole situation with Falcons getting Nico in the heroic core, or, you know, obviously the crazy curveball move that Esports just made, kicking their in-game leader Shuhei and bringing in Spinks. And, you know, these were definitely the talk of the town as far as blockbuster moves or just shocking things that happened in the scene. But in that video, I really did think that Jota represented an opportunity for Eternal Fire to add another star to the team. You know, obviously Xantares was their primary star, doing so in an entry rifling position, really only second to Donk in the amount of impact he has as an opener. And so being a star in such a critical role of a team, I thought was huge, and especially doing it later in his career after having already played on other Turkish teams and playing for Big, and to see the 2024 that he had and to see how he's kicking off this year, it's really incredible to see as he approaches 30 years old. And then Voxic really did also have his own type of resurgence as a star opera. You know, particularly the second half of 2024, he really kicked it back into gear and really became a promising second consistent star for this squad. And Wakadia represented a player who was still quite young, still quite inexperienced. You know, I think he is still very young in age, quite literally. I think he's just 19 years old, in fact, and really his only experience prior to being on Eternal Fire was being on Eternal Fire Academy and getting brought up into the main team. And then in Jota, it's a similar story. Yes, he's 22, a little bit older, but he also came from Eternal Fire's Academy system and then was on loan to Sangal for a lot of 2024, pretty much 9 months, and really helped that team get to 2 wins in a row for 2 back-to-back seasons of ECL, and, you know, looked really strong online. Didn't do so well at the RMRs of the Shanghai Major. That was one of the bigger disappointments, but Jota was individually their, you know, best player. And again, while there was really nothing wrong with Calyx, I really felt that the addition of Jota to the team would maybe give them that next gear, would give them that next piece of firepower that could catapult them from being kind of like, you know, a top 10, top 12 team that occasionally would punch above their weight and place really well in a tournament, to a team that could be similar to what Heroic was at the end of last year, or a team like a, you know, Mongols, or at times Liquid, where you can really put yourself in a consistent top 8 conversation, and you're occasionally going to have a top 4 finish or a finals appearance, and consistently kind of be in that mix. Yeah, you're not going to necessarily be in the top 5. You know, these teams that are consistently placing top 4, winning titles, making finals, we all know who the top 5 is at this point. That really hasn't changed much, and probably won't until we get some more results to go off of in 2025. But that this Eternal Fire team with this move of Jota really could spice things up and add a new, very competitive team to our, you know, whole scene. And I was really, really excited about that. And lo and behold, they get it done right away by coming second place at this Blast Spring Bounty on a pretty good run of teams that they beat, as we'll discuss, and only losing in the end to Spirit in a best of 5, where they actually won the opening map of the series, but then kind of got blasted in the other 3 maps, if we're honest. But Spirit, you know, is obviously the biggest story to come out of Last Spring Bounty, because they were coming in as the reigning major champions. That's the #1 team in the world, and they cashed in on that again, winning this whole event. And so I feel like a lot of conversation is going to be around Spirit and how damn good they are, and just how good Donk and Shiro is as a duo, and really a lot of the same storylines that we were talking about at the end of 2024 just persist with this win for Spirit, as they kind of continue to establish themselves at the top of the scene, as they were one of the teams that didn't make a roster move in the top 5. You know, when teams like Vitality were making moves, or G2 obviously had to make a move. You know, FaZe, while they weren't top 5, they were certainly floating around, you know, the top 8. They obviously made a move. And really, this was one of the teams alongside Navi that didn't. And then they're kind of cashing in on that a little bit, obviously, here. But because that was going to be kind of the main focus, and because some of the other roster moves and other news in the scene were going to be some of the bigger focuses, I really wanted to just talk about Eternal Fire and what I saw for them in the Blast Spring Bounty. Kind of our first look at this new team, and kind of talk about what they did, what I saw, what I liked, what I think this team could do in the future. But before I ramble anymore, just here at the very beginning with some housekeeping. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel and you do like the content here, please do hit that subscribe button. It means oh so much. We have gained over 500 subscribers over the last few weeks, and we broke through the 4,000 subscriber barrier here very recently, so I really appreciate all that support. Now the next goal, obviously, is to chase that 5,000 subscriber mark and then just keep growing this channel as I look to be consistently putting content on the channel throughout this year, and we'll see where we go from there as I try to also become a mainstay as an analyst and commentator and such in CS2 this year. So more news on that front hopefully soon. And yeah, if you like this video, hit the thumbs up, comment down below. All that stuff helps the algorithm, helps the channel grow, and I just would really appreciate that. But let's get into this, because we're going to start with kind of where Eternal Fire left off at the end of 2024, as they were a team that came top 8 at the first major of the year, losing to Na'Vi in the quarterfinals, the team who ultimately wound up winning the whole major. So not bad, especially when you consider the fact that they beat teams like Vitality, FaZe, Virtus.pro, Mongols, you know, things of that nature throughout the course of the opening stage and main stage of the majors to get to that top 8. But the follow-up wasn't really that great, if we're 100% honest. Didn't do so well in EPL Season 19. Their only wins were against Imperial and Fnatic. They lost to Saw, lost to FaZe, lost to Astralis. Just wasn't really that promising considering what they had done at the major itself. And then they had a couple other events they didn't really do so well at. Yala Compass, the Sky Esports Championship, and the Cologne play-in. They didn't even qualify for the main event because they lost to Complexity and Mongols. So just, you know, really not putting up results that would give you a whole lot of hope in them. But then they came second at the second Bet Boom Belgrade event, where they actually were able to beat Heroic, beat Furia, beat Pain, and beat Mousesports to make it to the grand finals, where they ultimately lost to Spirit 03. So, you know, a little bit of kind of a harken back to what we just kind of saw at the Spring Bounty, where they lost to Spirit again in a best of 5. Then they followed that up with a second place finish at EPL Season 20, where they beat Mongols, so got a little bit of a revenge after what happened at the Bet Boom event, and then they beat Vitality, made in Brazil, and took Na'Vi to 5 maps when Na'Vi was on that 6 finals in a row run, and ultimately did lose that. But 2 back-to-back second-place finishes on LAN and getting good results against top 5, top teams in the world. This is some good stuff. But then their end of the year really kind of put them back into question, because Rio did not go well at all. Yes, they did beat G2 in a best of 3, but they ultimately lost to Astralis and Mongols to finish in 9th, 12th place. And at the end of the day, that 9th, 12th doesn't look as bad when you actually look at the results. Again, they beat G2 and they played Mongols, and they went all 3 maps, and Mongols themselves were a very strong, you know, top 10, top 8 team. So not too shabby, but what did kill them was the fact that at ESL Challengers Katowice, it's not to be confused with IM Katowice, they wound up not even making the playoffs of the event after losing to Bait twice, once in a best of 1, and then in a best of 3, they lost to them 0-2, though one of the maps were in overtime. It's whatever. They shouldn't be losing to Bait, in my opinion, considering what they were doing earlier in the year and the talent that they have on their team. And then things got even worse when at the EU RMR for the Shanghai Major, they were unable to make it to the Major. And when you look at the fashion in which they didn't make it there, it's very damning. Because losing to 3D Max in a best of 1, I can somewhat forgive, but losing to Sashi and then losing to Astralis in a best of 3 when they didn't even have Device and they had to bring Bro back, and Cadian is just embedding himself as an IGL and as a rifler when he hadn't been rifling in a very long time, like, that is just unforgivable in my opinion. And so this was a very damning end to the year for Eternal Fire, who not that long ago had some second place finishes at some big events and competing against some very big name teams. It was very shocking. And then, of course, you had that whole situation where they went top 8 at the Copenhagen Major, but then fell off after that until they had those second place finishes. So it was a very up and down team in 2024. And it was just like shocking because, again, Xantares was one of the best entry fraggers in the world in 2024, hands down, bar none. I mean, yes, Donk was number 1. There's no question about that. But I really do think you could make a case for Xantares being number 2. Obviously, you have to throw Elise in that conversation. Obviously, you have to throw people like Nico and Malbs in that conversation. You know, Ziwu is in that conversation to some degree, though I think he takes far less opening attempts than some of the other names that I mentioned, so that makes it a little bit tougher. But my point is Xantares is in that conversation as one of the best, right? And then Voxic, again, became a true second consistent star for the team as an opper. Sure, you weren't going to put him in your top 5 oppers list, but I do think that he was still a very strong second piece of this team that really did give them the firepower. and they had a decent map pool. They had decent tactics. I mean, again, they weren't lighting the leaderboards as far as, where you had to rank them in those particular categories, but they were pretty darn good, I thought. And so these results definitely stunk. But again, I think the two big things for me were, one, I think they could use a little bit of additional firepower, and two, I just think that Wicadia needed more time to develop. Again, very young, only experience before this was the academy team, still finding his role, finding his place. There were times where he fragged very well and looked very sharp and looked like he could be the third star of this team, but there were other times where he seemed to struggle and go missing, and they really needed him. It felt like to kind of push them over the edge. And so it was an interesting position. But again, you can watch my kind of review of the Jota roster move and what I thought about it. But I really thought he represented an opportunity to bring in another dynamic extremity player who, wasn't going to be nearly as aggressive as Xantares, but could be more of a playmaker than Calyx was. He was going to be more aggressive, more assertive, sometimes entering, sometimes trading, or at least being a playmaker on the extremities, and be just a solid fragger as well defensively, whether it be in anchor positions or rotation positions. He kind of has a mix of them, though I generally kind of think of him as more of an anchor type player. And just that would maybe be like a fourth really strong talent to this team. And if you have Xantares and Vosic staying on their trajectory, or at least maintaining, and then you have Wicadia continuing to develop, and then you bring in someone like Jota, who showed clear promise on Sangal last year in the online environment, and then even on LAN when that Sangal team didn't do so hot, he individually looked pretty bright. And it just felt like this could level them up a little bit. And boy, did they. Because, the Fluxo win, we're not going to talk too much about that. But they beat Falcons, which is the heroic core that was very dangerous throughout kind of the last few months of 2024, particularly at the Major, with basically an upgraded version of the team, in my opinion. Because, yes, Nertz is fucking fantastic, but it's Nico. I mean, come on. Like, you get the heroic core, you get the Nico in there, and then Magus, I think, is slightly individually a better fragger than Shush. Or at the very least was going to be on par with him. So, like, this team, as long as they can, kind of hit the ground running, like, that should be a strong team. So they beat them 2-0. That's pretty damn good, in my opinion. Then they go to the main event on land now. They beat Vitality, completely crushed the hopes and dreams of everyone who thought that this blockbuster with Rops was going to make them the #1 team in the world, that they were going to be maybe like a team of the year. And I'm not going to overreact and pretend like Vitality aren't going to eventually figure things out and continue to be a top 5 team in the world, but this is still a quality win for Eternal Fire to kind of put a little bit of rain on that parade, so to speak. Then they beat G2 2-1, who, yes, lost Nico, but Heavy God's pretty talented player, and obviously they still got Mal's one of the best aggressive riflers and playmakers in the world. They still got Munacy, the best opera in the world, so still loads of talent on that team. And for all their shortcomings that I talk about tactically with Snacks as an IGL and Taz as a coach and yada, 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 and Nico is indeed a big loss, it's just still a quality win. And then at least they took a map off of Spirit. I mean, it kind of deflates after that. I'm not going to be, trying to jazz it up any more than what it is. But this marks a pretty cool result for them. Another second place finish at a sizable event in the sense of who they actually had to play against. And the fact that the big games against Vitality and G2 on land, 2 top 5 teams in the world, yes, with roster moves, but still maintaining core 4s, are really big results when they themselves are a core 4 implementing a new player. So they're under the same situation as teams like Vitality and G2 that they're beating. So you can't really make this excuse of, oh, well, they have their full 5 and this team is embedding a new player. No, Eternal Fire is doing the same thing. So this, I thought, was really fantastic. And so that's just the results aspect of it. As far as looking at the map pool, I mean, Anubis was a banger for them, right? Because they're an interesting team because they don't play Ancient, so let's forget about that. And then they weren't playing Train. It was like their either second rotation ban or other teams were banning it so they didn't have to play it. It was going to be, I think, the 5th map, and if it would have got that far against Spirit in the grand finals. So those 2 maps are kind of off the table, but let's look at the other 5. Their Anubis banged at this. They won it every time they played it. They beat Vitality, they beat G2, and they beat Spirit on a crazy comeback that went to overtime. So pretty fantastic stuff, especially considering how strong of a Anubis team Spirit really is. So we know their Anubis is already on point. It was one of their strongest maps last year as well, so they've maintained that. That's good news. As far as their DusT2 goes, that was also a map that was pretty strong for them last year. It wasn't like this crazy landslide, map for them. I think that their Inferno served them much better, for example. The fact that they could play Vertigo was certainly helpful. But DusT2 was definitely still a pretty solid map for them, and they were able to, look okay on it against G2, but their only win was against Fluxo. They did ultimately lose to G2 in a close game, and then they kind of got blasted by Spirit. So, results-wise, not great, but what I saw from the eye test, which we'll talk about in a second, actually still gave me a little bit of hope that they do have still some potential to be a pretty good team on that map. As far as Inferno goes, which is their other big map besides Anubis, they beat Falcons on it in the online portion of this tournament, and they never played it again. So, can't really glean too much from that, but we already know that Inferno was historically good for them, and they did win it the one time they did play it, so it seems like they've maintained that. So, okay, we've maintained Anubis, we've maintained Inferno. DusT 2 didn't have the best overall results this tournament, but again, what I saw didn't look bad, and it was never one of their top maps anyway, but still in the middle of their pool, so still pretty good, right? But then you have to worry about Mirage and Nuke. That's kind of the big ones that were kind of a dark mark against them. I think that really hurt them last year, was the fact that their Mirage wasn't that great overall. Yes, they had a lot of close losses, particularly some games in overtime against Mongols, close losses to FaZe and Na'Vi. They even had a loss to Na'Vi in overtime at one point. So their 6-11 record that they pretty much had on LAN last year didn't look the best, but when you kind of dug into the deeper details, it was okay. And then their Nuke was just kind of 50-50. Well, at this tournament, when you look at things, they actually were able to win Nuke against both G2 and Falcons, so actually looked pretty good there, but then got blasted by Spirit. And then on Mirage, I'm not going to give them too much credit for beating Fluxo on it, but they did beat Vitality, so I think that that's a pretty, legit win. And then they lost to Spirit. So 2-1, but one of the wins doesn't really matter that much to me. The one against Vitality, though, I think is legit. And yeah, they did get blasted by Spirit on Mirage. Though there was some bright marks, like outside of Anubis, Mirage was the closest map that they played, I think, of the other three. So, and there were some bright spots there at times that I saw from the eye test. So maps look pretty good. As far as individual performances go, obviously for the overall tournament, no one's going to jump off the page just because of how bad they got waxed by Spirit in the grand finals, when Chiro's dropping plus 40 on you, when Donk's being Donk, and no one really jumped off the page in that game. And so that one kind of took off a little bit of an overall hit. But when you look at the Falcons game online, everyone performed well, including jottAAA, their new member. Wacadia was their best player that series, next to Xantera. So that was a positive sign right off the bat. Then you get to LAN. When they play Vitality, they beat them 2-0. What do you know? It's Xanteris and Voxic, your two stars, doing it up again. But this time, jottAAA again plays another really good series overall. And Wacadia had his moments, even though overall for the series he wasn't that great. But jottAAA was definitely proving to be that potential star for them. Then against G2, again, they're up against very good firepower in Malbs, Heavy God, and Munacy in particular. They 2-1 this series. And Xanteris actually has an off series this series. Yet, Wacadia and Voxic do it up big time overall for the series, and then jottAAA again plays pretty good. So you're getting pretty good individual performances out of the players that you want to get good performances from for the majority of this. Yes, Xanteris didn't play that great against Spirit, and he didn't play that great against G2. Definitely a little bit uncharacteristic for him, but the whole team played bad against Spirit. It was in those final three maps, and so it's really kind of hard to gauge it. But let's kind of get off of that and actually look at how they look tactically, because that's kind of how I want to finish things off. And on Anubis, jottAAA basically got his spot on both sides of the map. He got to play B as on T side defaults, which is what he was known for playing in the past, being very good at it. He could help entry B. He could help assist in mid control. He was very flexible on the T side and how he could play, and he was just a good trade fragger as well and executes. And then he was a guy who was going to be playing the B bomb sites as kind of a site anchor, not playing the connector, but be more of an anchor. And he got those spots. Wacadia wound up moving to A on the T side to allow this to transition. And then he essentially kind of got to keep his A anchor position that he had in the past. Calyx, who had been a player who played their mid-rotator, was actually being taken up by Xanteris now, so you're putting kind of one of your star riflers in that mid-rotator position. So I thought they made some really good adjustments, is my point, to embed jottAAA onto the team on Anubis and to still make Wacadia pretty comfortable, all things considered, and to put Xanteris in a more prime position on the CT side. So I just really liked this. And what I also liked about it is that this team kept their strengths on this, which is they could play default very well. They at times could swap up Joda and Wakadia as far as like what extremity they were playing, or they could double up an extremity. And this is what made them such a good threat. And this wasn't just Anubis. This also happened on DusT 2, where you could have Joda and Wakadia kind of pair up on an extremity, and then you have Xantares kind of attacking the other angle, and that was kind of your two-front attack. And so Xantares would be able to create so much pressure and opening presence on his side. So if he's like attacking middle, for example, on an A split and attacking camera, then you have like Wakadia and Joda attacking A main, and then that just became a very dangerous site split for them. Or if you had Xantares, attacking B connector, then, Joda and Wakadia could attack B main, and that would create like a really cool split. Or if Xantares is pressuring middle, then they could be the ones really kind of help put the entries onto B with Major to create that space. And so they just did a very good job at being dynamic on their T sides. Yes, they could play their default positions that I listed earlier just fine, but they were very good at their heavy mid aggression, whether that was Xantares solo or whether that was, at times Joda right behind Xantares. Like, it really showed Joda's flexibility, not only in being able to play aggressive extremity positions, but also trade fragging behind Xantares in certain situations as well, and then played well defensively. On DusT 2, again, even though their overall results weren't great, again, they facilitated Joda correctly by giving him his spots as kind of a long A player on T side and an A anchor on the CT side. Major facilitated that on the CT side and kind of moving his position by taking over the B rotator role, and then Wakadia wound up taking Calix's B anchor role. So that's how they were able to kind of slot things around there. And then on the T side, Calix, who was the B tunnels player, that was Wakadia, now taking that spot over, giving the long A position over to Joda. And again, solid fundamentals as far as how they were playing DusT 2. Xantares was still obviously the main point of attack at middle and catwalk and all their executes and splits. But again, you saw the ability of this team to kind of use Joda and Wakadia as a pairing, pressuring an extremity, while Xantares was pressuring the other side. So if you were doing a B mid split, that was when Joda Wakadia would be able to press B tunnels and Xantares would be able to press the mid portion. Or, Joda could obviously help attack long A while Xantares was attacking up catwalk, or just these little things like that. Definitely they look good on. Again, very dynamic. We're able to change things up. Obviously, you could do the spawn-based plays that DusT 2 is known for. And again, they all looked pretty good defensively, despite the fact that Wakadia was having to play a new spot, Major was playing a new spot, and, they were able to give Joda that A anchor position, which he was very good on. Then Inferno, we're not really going to be able to talk about this too much, but Joda was basically a 1-for-1 for Calix on both sides of the map as an apartments player and as a guy who was going to be playing the A anchor position. And it was cool because this was Sangal's ban, so Joda didn't even really play Inferno recently for the last 9 months. Yet he was able to embed into this team as a playmaker in the apartments on T side, trade fragger on certain executes, and also be able to be a good A anchor on the CT side. So when they actually did play the Inferno match against Falcons, he played fine, and that was really the only time that they played it, though. So there is more to be studied, I guess, about their Inferno, but it looked pretty good so far, and they still maintain all the strengths that they've always had on Inferno with their other players and positions that they play. Then on Mirage, once again, Joda was a 1-for-1 for Calix on both sides of the map. But again, they were doing these things where they would double up Wakadia and Joda on the extremities, while Xantares was like the main guy pressuring middle, pressuring connector. Joda and Wakadia would be the ones kind of entering onto the A site. Or again, you would have Joda at times trade fragging behind Xantares. And again, looked very good, played the standard Mirage meta that you want to see as far as, mixing in these 3-2 and 4-1 splits, while also being able to play from default and going into mid-round attacks. I thought Joda looked fine as an A anchor, which is a position that he, had played in the past, so that was fine. And all in all, while they did get beat up pretty heavily, you would say, by Spirit on Mirage, at least they were able to put up a somewhat, T-side kind of get going. But did, essentially get beat pretty badly there. But we did see them beat Vitality on it earlier. So not too shabby overall on Mirage. And that's kind of where I'll leave it. Again, we never got to see them play Train. They don't play Ancient. They never have. And we need to still see more for them, in my opinion, on DusT 2 and Nuke. And we only got to see the one game of Inferno. So there's still a lot to learn. But I liked what I saw from Eternal Fire. For one, big result, getting second at the first big tournament of the year. 2, they beat some good teams on the way into doing it, particularly beating 2 top 5 teams in Vitality and G2 on LAN while they were changing a player. Yes, their other opponents were doing the same thing, but again, it kind of cancels each other out because you're all in the same boat, right? I thought we did see at times jottAAA perform to a very high level. Yes, all the numbers are skewed because they all played poorly against Spirit in the grand finals overall, but we did see in some series jottAAA really be a pretty consistent fragger for them on both sides of the map. And we still did see Xantares being Xantares. We still saw Voxic being Voxic. At times, even Lakadia was performing at high levels. And so, again, this team is a legit threat out there. This is another team that, while if you look at the rankings, no, they're not a top 5 team by any stretch of the imagination. That's not what I'm saying. And I don't even know that they're necessarily gunning for that on a consistent basis. I do think that, you still got top dogs in teams like Spirit and Na'Vi. If Vitality figures out their roster move, if somehow Mouse can maintain with Brolin as an IGL, if FaZe get cooking with the Liege, then I think that those teams are still very much in that position. Then Mongols is right there on the cusp as well, being a top 5 team as a team that didn't make any changes during the offseason. I do think Liquid with Nerds is also going to be a very dangerous team. I think Falcons, basically the heroic core with Nico and Magus, is going to be a dangerous team as well. But I could certainly see Eternal Fire. I think the teams that impress me the most, because obviously Spirit winning is impressive, but the teams that impress me the most as far as like eye test plus overall results, I would probably give it to Eternal Fire and then Pain. That would probably be the 2 teams that I would put up there. And look, I do think there's something to be said about Heroic doing pretty well, considering they were essentially kind of bringing in the other Sangall members, Xfloud and Youngster and, LNZ with Sun Pius and then Tanir, but then they had to use a stand-in for the LAN itself. And then Tanir is also kind of a stand-in for Nilo. So they're kind of going through some weird stuff in their own right. But yeah, I thought that this was a great first impression from this new Eternal lineup to kick off 2025. I'm excited to see how they develop going forward. And I just wanted to give them some love because I think that there were a lot of other stories that were catching a lot more attention, and for good reason. And obviously, Spirit's the main story because they won it all, but I wanted to give Eternal Fire their flowers as well because overall, I liked what I saw, and if they can keep this up, they could be a very interesting team going forward. So, hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like, subscribe, all that jazz, comment down below, and I'll catch you next time.